Services Commission in New Zealand. I've been leading public sector reform there for the last 5 years in what we call our Better Public Services Reform Program. So a lot of this relates very heavily to what we're trying to do. A couple of observations quickly. One is just the tension between and or. And I think in some ways it reflects on your adaptive and messy leadership environment is, of course, that the problem with adaptive and messy environments is that often it isn't an or. Often it's an and. So, you know, if you take something like an obvious one like internal risk culture to collaborative risk management, it's not like it's binary and you're shifting straight from one to the other. It's how you bring those two things together and create the space for one thing without losing the underlying capability to do the other. You know, and so that risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater when you go through this sort of process and keeping the good whilst getting somewhere else, but then sometimes transformative change demands you to throw lots of bathwater out. So, you know, that can be a very difficult balance. Speaking into this very well. The other observation is one about information. And it's not so much that I think it's a sixth shift, but maybe something that underpins the other 5 shifts in terms of its importance. Because knowledge is power, and our public sector systems are often about the distribution of power. And when I think about how information is changing everywhere, you know, not just in the public service, and its potential impact on the way that we work, it's very significant. So 3 thoughts about that. You know, one is a shift from silos to integration. So, you know, historically our public service departments, you know, areas of expertise have held their knowledge because knowledge is their power and they've held it to their own and then they've made decisions off the basis of that, and that's given them that centralised authority in order to drive decisions because they were the holder of the information. And of course if they don't have a monopoly on that information, then that changes that game. And as you shift from that, how you integrate that data and how you bring it together to give you a different perspective to drive your decisions, you know, which gets into the small data versus big data issue in terms of where that's driving us. And it also gets us into the secrecy versus transparency. I mean, you know, at varying degrees of pace of change all over the world, we're in a shift from public service environments in which secrecy was the standard to one in which progressively, whether governments like it or not, transparency is going to become more of a norm. And again, that's a really important underpinner of the changes that you're identifying.